A resilient widowed mother of two fights relentless battles against starvation, poverty, and despair on the unforgiving Texas frontier, her strength tested with each passing day. When a mysterious, gravely wounded stranger with dangerous secrets collapses at her door during the cruelest winter night, their fates become irrevocably entwined in a desperate struggle where newfound love and survival hang in the balance against ruthless enemies who would burn their world to ashes and scatter the remains across the endless prairie. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel, it's free, and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The wind didn't howl so much as it screamed, barreling down from the north with a vengeance only a Texas winter could summon. Sarah Coleman tightened the shawl around her shoulders and stared at the weak flame dancing in the hearth. It was barely enough to warm the room, let alone a family of three trying to outlast the coldest January in memory. Their log cabin, once filled with laughter and music when Thomas was alive, had fallen into silence. The gaps between the logs leaked cold like a sieve. The roof sagged. The pantry was nearly empty. The only things still full were the spaces where dreams used to be. Behind her, Emily whimpered in her sleep, bundled beneath patchwork quilts on the small cot. Joshua sat at the table, his head bent over the family Bible, lips moving slowly as he read. He was only 10 but already carried himself like a boy who'd learned too much too soon. Sarah stirred the pot over the fire. The stew was thin, mostly water with a few beans and a scrap of dried beef, but hot. That counted for something. She ladled a small portion into 3 chipped bowls, giving the fullest to the children. "Come eat," she said softly. Joshua obeyed. Emily stirred as Sarah touched her cheek, lifting her gently into her lap and coaxing her to sip. "Mama," Emily mumbled, "it's too salty." Sarah smiled despite herself. There hadn't been salt in that pot for weeks, but imagination was a gift she didn't dare correct. They ate in silence, broken only by the wind outside. Sarah was about to collect the bowls when she heard it. A strange, heavy thump against the front door. Not a knock, not the creak of settling wood. A body maybe, or a warning from the storm. She froze. Joshua's eyes snapped to hers. Sarah stood, reaching up to grab the old rifle Thomas had left behind. It wasn't loaded, hadn't been since the ammunition ran out, but holding it gave her courage. She nodded at Joshua. "Stay back." The door groaned open against a wall of swirling snow, and there, collapsed on the porch, lay a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered even in his slumped state, and dressed in clothes far too fine for their broken homestead. Tailored coat, embroidered vest, boots polished beneath a crust of ice and blood. A trail of red streaked the snow behind him. One arm clutched his side, the other hung limp. "Lord in heaven," Sarah whispered. "Mama," Joshua said from behind her. "Is he dead?" "No, not yet." She dropped the rifle and knelt beside the man. His pulse was weak but steady, his breath shallow clouds in the freezing air. Up close, she saw the wound, a gunshot, fresh, clean through the left side. Someone had meant to kill him. "Mama, what do we do?" Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed practicality. They had no food to spare, no medicine, no time. But she looked at Emily's sleepy eyes, Joshua's worried face, and the dying man's blood turning black in the snow. "We bring him in," she said. Together, she and Joshua dragged the stranger inside and laid him by the fire. The heat made him groan. Sarah worked quickly, stripping off his coat and vest. Blood soaked through the white shirt beneath. She cut the fabric open, wincing at the angry, ragged hole. But the bullet had gone clean through. He might live if infection didn't take him first. "Boil water," she told Joshua, "and bring me the herb tin." Emily, sweetheart, fetched Mama the clean cloths from the chest. The children obeyed without question. As Sarah cleaned the wound, she noted other marks. Old scars, puckered skin from past bullets and blades. This man had seen violence before and lived through it. "You fought a lot of battles," she murmured, "but I don't know if you'll win this one." She stitched the wound with trembling hands using the last of her good thread. Then she packed it with herbs and wrapped it tight. By the time she finished, the man was unconscious again, his fever rising. Hours passed. Snow piled against the door. The cabin grew darker. Sarah sat beside him, wiping his brow with a damp cloth. Occasionally he mumbled names, half sentences. "Catherine, tell her, the deed." She leaned closer. "What deed?" But he slipped back into silence. When the children were finally asleep, Sarah examined the man's coat and found it lined with silk. Not local. His boots bore the mark of St. Louis leatherwork, and in his vest pocket was a silver watch. She flipped it open. Inside was an inscription in delicate script. To DW with all my heart, always, Catherine. Sarah stared at the engraving. Whoever he was, he mattered to someone, and someone had tried to end him. She looked back at the man sleeping by her hearth. Who exactly had she let into her home? Morning came late in Texas during winter, and when it did, it crept in, shy and gray. Sarah sat beside the wounded man, rubbing her arms to keep warm. The fire had burned low, and she dared not waste more wood until Joshua brought in another load. The stranger hadn't stirred since the fever set in, his brow beaded with sweat, his lips dry and cracked. She'd done what she could, cleaned the wound again, changed the poultice, whispered prayers, but his breathing was still shallow, and his face had turned a worrying shade of gray. She checked the silver pocket watch once more. Its hinges creaked from frost, but the inscription inside hadn't changed. To DW with all my heart, always, Catherine. Who was Catherine? A wife, a sister, a woman waiting for a man who might never come home. She slipped the watch back into his vest. Whoever he was, someone had once loved him deeply. That had to mean something. "Mama?" came Emily's soft voice from behind her. "Is he going to die?" Sarah turned, offering her daughter a weak smile. "Not if I can help it." Joshua came in next, shaking snow off his coat. "Wood's wet," he muttered, "but I stacked the driest near the stove." "You're a good boy," Sarah said, brushing the hair from his brow. He didn't react, just looked past her at the man on the floor. "He's been shot," Joshua said plainly. "Yes. Think he's an outlaw?" Sarah glanced down at the fine coat, the tailored vest now stained red. "He doesn't look like one. Maybe a rich one." That gave her pause. It was true. The man didn't look like any drifter she'd ever seen. His clothes had been stitched by hand, his boots custom made. Even the buttons on his shirt were mother of pearl. Joshua's eyes narrowed. "You think someone tried to rob him, maybe?" "Maybe, or someone wanted him dead for a different reason." Emily crawled close to the stranger, careful not to touch him. "He's still breathing," she whispered. "Good," Sarah said. "That's all we need him to do today." She tried to keep the children busy. Joshua with his lessons, Emily with her sewing, but the stranger drew their attention like a fire on a moonless night. They watched his every twitch, every groan, as if waiting for him to sit up and explain the mystery himself. By mid-afternoon, the storm had eased enough for Sarah to fetch more water from the creek. She left Joshua in charge and hurried down the narrow trail through the snow. She hated leaving them, but she also knew the harsh truth of their life. Survival meant doing the hard things even when they scared her. When she returned, the cabin smelled of broth. Joshua had heated the last bit of dried beans in water. Sarah let herself feel a flicker of pride. He was becoming a man too quickly, but he was becoming a good one. She set the water down and checked the stranger's temperature, still high. And then, as if spurred by her touch, he stirred. His eyes fluttered open. Sarah froze. The man blinked at the ceiling, confusion clouding his gaze. Then he turned slowly, painfully, and saw her. "You," he rasped. "Where?" "You're safe," she said, voice calm but firm. "You were shot, found you outside in the storm. You've been here 2 nights." He tried to sit up, winced, and collapsed again. "Easy," Sarah warned. "You move too fast and you'll tear your stitches." He closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again. The horse didn't make it. A flash of pain crossed his face. Not for himself, she thought, but for the animal. That told her something. "You got a name, mister?" Joshua asked from the doorway, arms crossed. The man turned toward him, blinked a few times, then gave a small nod. Daniel Walker." Sarah shared a look with Joshua. "You want to tell us what happened, Mr. Walker?" He tried a smile, but it came out crooked. "Not yet. I owe you that much. But first, I need to stay alive." "Fair enough. Rest then," Sarah said. "There'll be time for talk later." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat near the hearth, cleaning up their small dinner. Daniel stirred again, enough to speak more clearly. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door," he murmured. "You didn't," she said. "Not yet, anyway." He smiled at that. "You've got grit, Mrs. Coleman." "Sarah Coleman," his eyes softened. "Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, for saving my life. You can thank me by getting better. My children don't need another ghost in this house." He nodded, the seriousness returning to his face. "They're good kids, smart, brave, like their mother." Sarah didn't reply. Compliments from near strangers didn't sit easy, but his tone was sincere. She stood to check the fire, turning her back to him. "You need sleep." He didn't argue, but before she walked away, she heard him whisper, barely audible above the crackling logs. "They'll come looking. I just hope they don't find you first." Sarah turned, but his eyes were already closed. She watched him for a long moment, heart thudding with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Who was this man, really? And what danger had she just invited into her home? Chapter 2. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of someone moving inside the cabin, and it wasn't the children. She sat up instantly, hand reaching for the rifle leaning by the hearth. It hadn't fired in months, but it still made her feel less exposed. Daniel Walker was standing at the window, pale and unsteady but upright. His right hand rested on the wall for balance, and his shirt, her late husband's old one, hung awkwardly over the fresh bandages at his side. "You shouldn't be up," she said, moving toward him. He didn't turn, just kept staring out across the snow-covered plains. "Didn't mean to wake you. It's just quiet out here. Peaceful." Sarah moved past the stove, setting a kettle to boil. "Too quiet sometimes, the kind that presses on your ribs if you let it." He gave a small nod. "Where I'm from, there's always noise. Wagons, livestock, ranch hands arguing about feed rations, men yelling about land rights like they're fighting a war. Sounds exhausting." "It is." He finally looked at her then. "But here, it's different. Your home, your children. It feels like something that still matters." Sarah busied herself with the kettle, trying not to meet his gaze. Compliments like that were dangerous, especially coming from a man who still hadn't explained why someone wanted him dead. The front door opened, and Joshua came in with an armful of firewood. He froze when he saw Daniel standing. "You shouldn't be walking," the boy said, narrowing his eyes. Daniel smiled. "You sound just like your mother." "I'll take that as a compliment," Joshua muttered, stomping snow from his boots. Emily came in a moment later, cheeks red from the cold, holding her small basket close. "2 eggs today," she declared, holding them out with pride. "And both of them whole this time." Sarah took them gently. "Well done, darling. That's breakfast sorted then." Daniel stepped forward. "May I help?" Joshua looked skeptical. "Can you cook?" "No," Daniel admitted, "but I can chop vegetables and not burn the house down." Sarah gave a faint smile. "Good enough." As they worked, Daniel moved slower than the others, careful not to strain his injury. But he was useful, chopping the last withered potato, fetching water, even showing Joshua how to properly sharpen the kitchen knife. "You've done this before," Sarah said, surprised. "I may look like a fancy man," Daniel replied, "but I grew up on a ranch before I had money to throw at problems. My father made sure I learned the hard way first." They ate together that morning, real food if humble, boiled eggs with cornbread and the last of the pickled beets. Daniel insisted on taking the smallest portion, and Sarah didn't argue, though Emily slipped him a second piece of cornbread when she thought no one was looking. After breakfast, the children bundled up to head to the small schoolhouse a mile down the road. Daniel watched them through the frosted window. "They walk all that way?" "Every day," Sarah replied, wiping the table clean. "Thomas, my late husband, said learning was their ticket to a better life." "He was right," Daniel murmured. "They're fine children." Sarah hesitated, then finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her for days. "Mr. Walker, why were you out here in the first place? Who shot you?" He didn't answer at first, just stared at the snow-covered field for a long time. Then quietly, "I was carrying documents. Proof of fraud, land theft, bribery, everything a man named Victor Blackwood has done to squeeze small ranchers out of this valley." Sarah's stomach turned. She knew that name. Everyone around here did. "He's trying to buy out the entire county," she said. "People say he owns half of everything already." Daniel nodded grimly. "He wants the Triple W Ranch, my ranch. He's been at it for years, poaching cattle, sabotaging wells, threatening families. But this time, he went too far. I gathered affidavits, maps, bank ledgers, was riding north to meet with the territorial marshal when I got ambushed." He looked down at the wound beneath his shirt. "Didn't think I'd make it. Then I woke up on your floor." Sarah's mind reeled. The Triple W was legendary. That land alone was worth a fortune. And here she'd been spoon-feeding its owner bean broth and binding him up with her last strip of linen. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," Daniel said, his voice low, "I recover, and then I finish what I started." Before Sarah could reply, a sound outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats? She moved to the window. 2 men on horseback, riding slow, looking at the cabin like it might bite them. "They're not from town," she said. Daniel was already reaching for the coat she'd folded for him. "No," he said, "they're Blackwoods. I recognize the horses." He reached beneath the coat, pulled something heavy from the lining. A Colt Peacemaker, loaded. Sarah's breath caught. "You brought a gun into my home?" "To protect it," he said simply. but I'll stay out of sight. You answer the door. If they ask, you haven't seen me. You're in no shape to fight anyone. I won't, unless I have to. Sarah opened the door just as the two riders pulled up. Both wore dusters, too clean for cowhands. One had a thin scar running down his cheek. The other tipped his hat with false politeness. Morning, ma'am. We're looking for a man. Tall, dark hair, might have come this way. Injured. Sarah didn't flinch. I've seen nothing but snow and starving cattle. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mind if we take a look around? I do, she said firmly. My children are inside. We don't take kindly to strangers sniffing around. They stared at her for a long moment. Then the one with the scar spat in the snow. We'll be back. She shut the door on them without another word. Daniel stepped out from the back room, face pale but eyes steady. You lied for me. I did. Why? Sarah stared at the door. Because my children are watching and I don't want them to see me afraid. Daniel nodded slowly, lowering the gun. And in that moment, Sarah Coleman realized she had just stepped into something much larger than she could see. Something with consequences that had only just begun. The riders didn't return that night, but their absence hung over the cabin like a loaded sky. Daniel had barely spoken since they left. He sat near the fire, polishing his Colt in silence, his expression unreadable. Sarah didn't press him. She knew the look of a man calculating risk, cataloging consequences. Thomas had worn that same look after each bad harvest when they'd sit at the same table, deciding which bills could be paid and which had to wait. The next morning, Daniel was gone. Sarah panicked at first, ran out into the yard barefoot, heart thudding, but then saw him by the edge of the field. He wasn't fleeing. He was walking, slow and deliberate, each step heavy but upright. He stood with his coat pulled tight and his shoulders squared, looking out over the snow-covered field like he was remembering something long buried. She approached slowly. You should be resting. Daniel didn't turn. I've been resting for a week. If I don't move now, I'll forget how. Sarah folded her arms, shivering in the wind. That's foolishness talking. He glanced sideways at her, gave the faintest smile. Maybe, but I needed to see this place. The land, the cabin, your children. Sarah hesitated. Why? Because I have something to tell you. Something I should have said the moment I could speak. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded paper, stiff with cold. She took it with cautious fingers. It was a deed. Official, stamped, signed. Triple W Ranch owner, Daniel W. Walker. Sarah stared at the document, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. This is real? He nodded. I didn't lie. I own the Triple W, and I didn't just come here by chance. I was riding to meet the marshal in Fort Worth. The documents were in my saddlebag until someone tried to kill me. Blackwood's men? Daniel's eyes hardened. I've been one step ahead of them for months. I thought I'd bought myself time, but I was wrong. Sarah held the deed like it might burn her hands. Why show me this? Because I owe you more than just my life. And because I'm about to make a decision that affects you and your children. I never asked you for anything, Daniel. I know, that's what makes this so damn hard. He turned fully toward her now, wind ruffling his coat. I spoke with your bank. Her breath caught. You what? 3 weeks behind, close to foreclosure. That's none of your... It is now. He pulled another envelope from his coat and held it out. I paid it. The deed is yours again, free and clear. Sarah stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that? Because when a stranger is bleeding to death and a woman with 2 starving children takes him in without question, that's not charity. That's honor. And honor deserves to be repaid. She backed away from him, the papers trembling in her hands. We can't accept this. I don't want to owe any man anything. You don't, Daniel said quietly. You saved me. That's more than money can measure. He stepped closer. But that's not all I came to say. Sarah swallowed hard. What now? The Triple W is too big for one man to run alone. I've got men and cattle, yes, but I don't have roots. I don't have a family to anchor it to. Until now. Her stomach flipped. I want to partner with you, he said. Expand your land, build a new barn, set up a breeding operation here. You'd have a wage, a stake, and a future that doesn't depend on charity or handouts. Sarah's breath shook. That's a lot to offer someone you barely know. I know more than enough, he said, voice steady. I've watched you ration meals so your children could eat. I've seen your boy gather kindling in a blizzard. Your girl praise you for soup made from nothing but snow water and dried roots. He paused. You've built something here that money can't buy. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her throat was too tight. He let the silence settle. Then softly, "Say yes, and I'll file the papers in town tomorrow. Say no, and I'll walk away with no hard feelings." Sarah turned away, blinking hard against the cold. She thought of Thomas, of their dreams, their hard-won life that had unraveled after he died. She thought of Joshua pretending not to be hungry, of Emily whispering to her doll about being scared at night, of how they'd all felt a little less afraid since Daniel had arrived. She turned back to face him, decision made. But before she could speak, they both heard it. Distant hoofbeats, not 2 horses this time, but many. And at their head, a man whose reputation had spread through the county like wildfire. Victor Blackwood had found them. Chapter 3. The wind had turned sharp by dawn, carrying with it the scent of danger. Sarah felt it in her bones before she even saw the riders cresting the hill. Her hand went instinctively to Daniel's arm, gripping tight enough to feel the tension beneath his coat. "Get inside," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. "Take the children and go to the storm cellar." Sarah shook her head. "This is my home. I won't hide." "Sarah, no." Her eyes flashed with a determination that brooked no argument. "I didn't survive 3 years alone by running from trouble." Daniel studied her face, then gave a slight nod. "Then we faced them together. But the children—" "Joshua," Sarah called, turning toward the cabin where her son stood watching from the window. "Take your sister to the cellar. Lock it from inside. Don't come out until you hear my voice." The boy hesitated only a moment before vanishing from view. Sarah knew he would obey. He always did when it mattered most. Daniel reached beneath his coat, drawing the Colt. "6 shots," he murmured. "Let's hope that's enough." The riders approached slowly now, a formation of 5 men spread in a menacing half circle. Their leader sat tall on a black stallion, his coat fine wool, his hat tipped low over eyes that never seemed to blink. Sarah had never met Victor Blackwood, but she'd heard enough to recognize power wrapped in cruelty. "Stay behind me," Daniel said, stepping forward to position himself between Sarah and the approaching men. She ignored him, moving to stand directly at his side. "My land," she whispered. "My fight too." The riders halted 20 yards from the cabin. Blackwood raised a gloved hand, and his men stilled completely, like hounds awaiting the command to attack. "Daniel Walker," Blackwood called, his voice carrying across the yard with an unsettling calm. "You're looking remarkably alive for a dead man." "Disappointed," Daniel called back. "Merely surprised. My men usually finish what they start." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Sarah, studying her with cold detachment. "And who might this be? Your latest charity case, Walker?" Sarah felt Daniel tense beside her. "Mrs. Sarah Coleman," Daniel replied evenly. "This is her land you're trespassing on." A thin smile creased Blackwood's face. "Is it now?" "Last I checked, the bank was about to claim it." He looked directly at Sarah. "Hard times, Mrs. Coleman. A widow, I presume, given the state of things. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that benefits us both." "I have no business with you, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear curling inside her chest. "Oh, but you do." Blackwood dismounted smoothly, his boots hitting the frozen ground with a soft thud. "You're harboring a man who's stolen property of mine, sensitive documents that might be misunderstood in the wrong hands." "You mean evidence," Daniel cut in. "Records of bribes, threats, land grabs." "Nothing that could be misunderstood, Victor. Just the plain truth of what you've done." Blackwood sighed as if genuinely disappointed. "Always so righteous, Daniel. It's why your father never took you seriously, you know. Too much principle, not enough practicality." He took a step forward. "The documents, where are they?" "Safe," Daniel said, "and copies already on their way to the governor's office." Sarah saw the flicker of uncertainty that passed over Blackwood's face. Gone almost before it registered, replaced by that same calculated smile. "An empty threat," Blackwood said, but there was a new edge to his voice, and one that puts this charming family in considerable danger. His eyes settled on Sarah again. "Tell me, Mrs. Coleman, did Daniel explain what happens to those who cross me? Did he mention the Preston family? Their little girl still has nightmares, I hear." Sarah felt a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Are you threatening my children, Mr. Blackwood?" "Merely stating facts, ma'am. The world is a dangerous place for those who choose the wrong allies." Daniel raised his Colt, aiming it steady at Blackwood's chest. "That's enough." With frightening coordination, all 4 of Blackwood's men drew their weapons, each trained on Daniel. 5 guns against 1, Walker," Blackwood said mildly. "Poor odds, even for a man of your considerable talents." 6. The voice came from behind them, steady and clear. Sarah turned to see Joshua standing on the cabin porch, Thomas's old shotgun balanced in his small hands. It was almost comical how large the weapon looked against his thin frame, except for the absolute determination in his eyes. "Joshua," Sarah's heart seized. "I told you to stay in the cellar. Couldn't let you face them alone, Ma." Joshua's voice quavered slightly, but his grip on the shotgun remained firm. Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "How touching. The little man of the house." He turned to his men. "Porter, if this gets ugly, shoot the boy first." The man with the scar, Porter, nodded, shifting his aim toward Joshua. "You touch my son," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "and I'll kill you myself." Something in her tone made even Blackwood pause. Perhaps it was the absolute certainty in her words, the look of a mother who had already lost too much and could not lose more. "This standoff benefits no one," Daniel said into the tense silence. "Victor, your operation is finished whether you leave here peacefully or not. The evidence is already beyond your reach." "Perhaps," Blackwood conceded, "but revenge, that's still very much within my grasp." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Sarah could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one twitch of a finger, and blood would soak the snow-covered ground. Then, as if delivered by Providence itself, a new sound cut through the standoff. Horses approaching, not from the direction of town, but from the north road. All heads turned to see three riders approaching at a gallop, badges glinting in the winter sun. "The law," Daniel said softly. "Right on time." Blackwood's face hardened. "This isn't over, Walker." "It is for today," Daniel replied. The marshal and his deputies pulled up alongside Blackwood's men, hands resting meaningfully on their holstered weapons. "Quite a gathering," observed the marshal, a weathered man with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. "Something I should know about, Victor?" Blackwood's smile returned, smooth as oil. "Just a friendly visit, Marshal Townsend. Checking on an old associate who's been unwell." With 4 armed men, the marshal's gaze swept over the scene, taking in Daniel's Colt, Joshua's shotgun, the tense tableau of Sarah standing her ground. "Mrs. Coleman, everything all right here?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "These men were just leaving, Marshal." Marshal Townsend nodded. "Good. Then we'll escort them back to town." He fixed Blackwood with a pointed stare. "I received some interesting correspondence this morning, Victor. Think you and I need to have a long conversation about certain business practices." The muscle in Blackwood's jaw twitched, the first genuine display of emotion Sarah had seen from him. "Of course, Marshal. Always happy to clear up any misunderstandings." "I bet you are," Townsend gestured to his deputies. "Gentlemen, shall we?" Blackwood mounted his horse with fluid grace, but his eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "This isn't justice, Walker. It's just a delay." "Then I'll see you in court," Daniel replied evenly. The riders departed, Blackwood's men flanked by the lawmen. Sarah waited until they disappeared over the ridge before letting her shoulders sag, the tension draining from her like water from a broken dam. Joshua lowered the shotgun, his hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "Ma, Sarah crossed to him in 3 strides, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "Don't you ever disobey me like that again?" she whispered into his hair, her voice cracking. "Don't you ever." "I'm sorry, Mom, but I couldn't let you face them alone." She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "You're too brave for your own good, Joshua Coleman. Too much like your father." Pride flickered across the boy's face, mixed with a desperate need for approval that made Sarah's heart ache. He was still so young, trying so hard to be the man of the house. Too young, too soon. Daniel approached them slowly, his gun now holstered beneath his coat. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said to Joshua. "But I'm glad you were there." Joshua straightened. "The gun isn't loaded, hasn't been for months." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "You bluffed Blackwood's men with an empty shotgun?" A hint of a smile touched the boy's lips. "Ma says sometimes courage is just not letting on how scared you really are." Sarah brushed the hair from Joshua's forehead. "Go check on your sister. Tell her it's safe now." As Joshua disappeared into the cabin, Sarah turned to Daniel. "Your marshal friend arrived at a convenient time." "Not coincidence," Daniel admitted. "I sent a telegram before I left the Triple W, asked him to bring the evidence directly to the governor, then meet me in town 3 days later. When I didn't show," he shrugged. "Townsend's many things, but stupid isn't one of them." Sarah studied him, seeing him anew in light of everything that had happened. Not just a wounded stranger now, but a man of calculation, of forethought, someone who'd been fighting Blackwood long before he stumbled onto her porch. "You risked everything," she said quietly. "Your ranch, your life. Why?" Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and certain. Because some things matter more than others. Because men like Blackwood don't stop unless someone makes them. He paused. Because someone has to stand for something in this world, or we all fall together. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Sarah that had lain dormant since Thomas died. A belief that goodness could still exist in a world that had shown her mainly hardship. She was about to respond when Emily burst from the cabin, tears streaking her small face as she ran to her mother. "Mama, I was so scared." The little girl flung herself into Sarah's arms. "The bad men are gone?" Sarah lifted her, settling Emily on her hip, despite her being nearly too big for such comforts. "They're gone, sweet pea, and they won't be coming back," Emily hiccuped, burying her face in her mother's neck. "Promise?" Sarah's eyes met Daniel's over her daughter's head. She saw in his gaze a promise of his own, unspoken but resolute. "I promise," Sarah said, and for the first time in a long while she believed it might be true. The marshal returned that evening, alone this time. Sarah served him coffee at the kitchen table, while Daniel explained everything. The evidence he'd gathered, the ambush, how Sarah had saved his life. "Blackwood's been taken into custody," Townsend said, warming his hands around the tin cup. "Those documents you sent were damning enough, but when we searched his office," he shook his head. "Let's just say the man kept meticulous records of his crimes. Pride," Daniel said quietly, "always was his weakness." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Trial, probably in Austin. Governor's involved now, so it'll move quickly." Townsend took a sip of coffee. "His operations being dismantled. Land deeds restored to rightful owners where we can trace them." Daniel nodded. "And his men. Porter and 2 others are in cells. The rest scattered like rats from a burning barn." Townsend's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "You did it, Daniel. You brought him down." "Not alone," Daniel said, his eyes finding Sarah's across the table. The marshal didn't miss the look that passed between them. He cleared his throat, setting his cup down with a gentle tap. "Speaking of land deeds, Mrs. Coleman, seems there have been some changes to your property records at the county office. Paid in full, from what I hear." Sarah's cheeks warmed. "Mr. Walker has been generous." Townsend studied them both for a moment longer, then stood. "Well, I've got a long ride back to town. Daniel, you'll need to come in tomorrow, make an official statement." I'll be there." After the marshal left, Sarah busied herself clearing away the coffee cups, her mind whirling with everything that had happened in a single day. The threat of Blackwood gone, the bank debt gone, the constant worry that had been her companion for 3 years, not gone, but somehow lighter. She felt Daniel's presence before she saw him, a warmth at her back as she stood at the wash basin. "You never answered my proposal," he said softly, "about the partnership." Sarah turned, finding him closer than she expected. "A lot's happened since then." "It has. My offer stands." He hesitated, then added, "Though I find myself wanting to amend it." "How so?" His eyes held hers, steady and clear. "I'm thinking of something more permanent than a business arrangement." Sarah's breath caught. "Daniel!" "I know it's fast," he said quickly. "Too fast, maybe. But life out here has a way of teaching you not to waste time. I've watched you with your children, seen how you faced down danger without flinching, how you took in a stranger when you had nothing to spare." He took a deep breath. "I admire you, Sarah Coleman, and I hope, there might be a future for us that's more than just adjoining land." Sarah stood very still, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought of Thomas, his laugh, his dreams, the way he loved their children. She would always carry him with her. But she also thought of the loneliness of the past 3 years, the struggle to hold everything together alone. And now here was Daniel Walker, a man who had literally bled on her floor, who had faced down enemies for her, who looked at her children with genuine affection, a man who saw her strength and didn't try to diminish it. "I need time," she said finally. "Not a no, just time." Daniel nodded, relief visible in the softening of his shoulders. "Time is something I can give." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat alone by the hearth. Daniel's papers spread before her. The deed to her land, now clear of debt. The proposed partnership agreement for joining her homestead with the Triple W. And a third document he'd added tonight, a letter written in a steady hand, asking if she might consider a courtship in the spring, when the land had thawed and new growth had begun. Outside, the wind still howled, but for the first time in years, it didn't sound so much like loneliness. It sounded like change, like possibility. Sarah folded the letter carefully and held it against her heart. allowing herself to imagine a future she hadn't dared consider before. A future where her children had enough to eat, where the cabin was repaired, where she didn't face each day's challenges alone. A future where perhaps there might even be love again. She hadn't given Daniel an answer yet. She needed to be sure, for herself, for her children, for the memory of Thomas that she still honored. But as she watched the fire's glow cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Sarah Coleman felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. And for tonight, that was enough. Enjoying our stories? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Now let's get back to our story. Chapter 4. February melted into March, and the iron grip of winter gradually loosened its hold on the land. The first tentative green shoots appeared along the creek bed, and the air carried the promise of renewal. Sarah Coleman stood on her porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands as she surveyed her small homestead with new eyes. In the 6 weeks since Daniel Walker had stumbled into her life, so much had changed. The cabin roof no longer sagged, patched by skilled hands from the Triple W Ranch. The barn sported new planking, the chicken coop had been reinforced, and a small vegetable garden had been tilled in preparation for planting. Signs of hope were everywhere, tangible reminders that she was no longer fighting alone against the relentless tide of poverty and hardship. Daniel had kept his word. He'd given her time, never pressing for an answer to his courtship proposal, though his regular visits made his intentions clear enough. Twice a week he rode from the Triple W, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just his company. The children had grown fond of him, especially Joshua, who hung on Daniel's every word about ranch management and cattle breeding. Today he was due again, and Sarah found herself watching the horizon with an anticipation that both warmed and unsettled her. She wasn't ready to acknowledge the flutter in her chest when she heard hoofbeats approaching, nor the way her hand unconsciously smoothed her hair before opening the door. "Expecting company?" The voice came from behind her, startling Sarah from her thoughts. Martha Jenkins, her nearest neighbor at 3 miles distant, stood at the corner of the porch, a basket over her arm and a knowing smile on her weathered face. "Martha, I didn't hear you ride up." Sarah quickly composed herself, gesturing for the older woman to join her. "Walked. Horse is lame." Martha climbed the steps with the agility of a woman half her 60 years. "Beautiful day for it." She set her basket down, eggs by the look of it, wrapped carefully in cloth. "Thought you might need these. Heard your hens aren't laying well yet." "That's kind of you." Sarah accepted the gift, knowing it was more than just eggs being offered. In frontier communities, such exchanges were the currency of human connection, each gift a thread in the fabric that bound them together against hardship. Martha settled herself on the porch bench, making it clear she intended to stay a while. "So the Walker boy's been coming around regular, I hear." Sarah felt warmth creep into her cheeks. News traveled fast in these parts, even between widely scattered homesteads. "He's been helping with repairs." Martha's smile deepened. "Seems to me there's plenty of hands at the Triple W who could hammer a nail. Don't need the owner himself for that. He feels responsible after what happened with Blackwood." Martha snorted softly. "Responsible? That what they're calling it these days?" She patted the bench beside her. "Sit down, girl. My neck hurts looking up at you." Sarah obeyed, sensing a motherly lecture coming. Martha had been a friend to her since Thomas died, offering practical help and blunt advice in equal measure. Her own children were grown and scattered across 3 states, leaving her with a surplus of maternal wisdom she dispensed freely. "You know what people are saying?" Martha asked. "I can imagine. Some say you're foolish to even consider it. Man shows up half dead, reveals he's wealthy, suddenly takes an interest. Suspicious timing." Sarah stiffened. "Daniel Walker is not—" Martha held up a weathered hand. "I'm not finished. Others say you'd be a fool not to accept. Widow with 2 children, struggling homestead, and a respected rancher offering security? They think you should have said yes before he finished asking." "And what do you say, Martha?" The older woman's eyes softened. "I say it's not about what makes practical sense. It's about what your heart tells you." She placed a gnarled hand over Sarah's. "I watched you grieve Thomas, saw how you held yourself together for those children when most would have crumbled. You earned the right to choose your own path." Sarah swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "I love Thomas. Still do, in a way." "Of course you do. Love doesn't end when someone dies, but it doesn't mean there isn't room for something new." Martha squeezed her hand. Thomas wouldn't want you continuing alone out of some misplaced loyalty. It's not that simple. Never said it was, but I've lived long enough to know happiness doesn't come knocking often in this life. When it does, only a fool turns it away without consideration. Sarah gazed out across her land toward the distant line of trees that marked the creek. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Afraid of making a mistake. Afraid of risking what little stability we've managed to build. That's just good sense talking. But ask yourself this. What are you more afraid of? Making a mistake by saying yes or regretting saying no for the rest of your days? Before Sarah could respond, Emily came bursting from the cabin, her face alight with excitement. Mama, he's coming! I can see him! The 7-year-old pointed eagerly toward the western ridge, where a lone rider was indeed approaching. Martha chuckled, rising from the bench with a slight groan. Well, that's my cue to make myself scarce. Think on what I said, Sarah. She collected her empty basket. And for heaven's sake, girl, wear that blue dress next time. The one with the lace collar. Thomas always said it brought out your eyes. With a knowing wink, Martha descended the porch steps and started down the path toward her own homestead, passing Daniel with a friendly wave as their paths crossed. Daniel Walker looked different than he had that first night. Stronger, his face no longer drawn with pain, his posture straight and confident in the saddle. His clothes were practical for ranch work, but still of better quality than most in the county could afford. The gunshot wound had healed well, leaving only a slight stiffness in his movements that Sarah doubted anyone else would notice. He dismounted with practiced ease, tipping his hat to Sarah as Emily raced down to greet him. Miss Emily, growing taller each time I see you. He produced a small package from his saddlebag. Picked these up in town. Thought you might like them. Emily unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a set of colored pencils. 6 different hues nestled in a wooden case. For me? Really? The little girl's eyes widened in wonder. Such luxuries were rare in their household. Really? Saw how good you were drawing with that charcoal stick? Figured you deserved proper tools? Emily clutched the pencils to her chest. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Wait till Joshua sees. She darted back to the cabin, calling for her brother, leaving Daniel and Sarah alone on the sun-dappled path. That was thoughtful, Sarah said as he approached. You'll spoil her. Daniel smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Can't help it. She reminds me of my sister at that age. Same enthusiasm for everything. I didn't know you had a sister. A shadow crossed his face. Had scarlet fever when she was 9. I'm sorry. He nodded, accepting her sympathy without dwelling on it. How are you, Sarah? Truly? The direct question, asked with such genuine concern, caught her off guard. How long had it been since someone had asked about her well-being and actually waited for an honest answer? Better, she said finally. The children are sleeping through the night again. No more nightmares about Blackwood. And you? Sarah hesitated. I still check the locks twice. Still wake at every unusual sound. That'll fade with time. He glanced toward the cabin. I've brought the seed potatoes I promised. Early variety. Should do well in your soil. And some corn that's been successful at the Triple W. Thank you. She paused, gathering her courage. Would you stay for dinner? It's nothing fancy, just rabbit stew, but there's plenty. Something in his expression lightened. I'd like that very much. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was different than it had been during those first desperate days of Daniel's recovery. Joshua proudly showed him the arithmetic problems he'd mastered at school. Emily insisted on demonstrating every color in her new pencil set, drawing elaborate pictures that Daniel praised with genuine admiration. Sarah moved about the kitchen, aware of Daniel's eyes following her occasionally, the conversation flowing easily around her. This wasn't the tense silence of survival anymore, but something warm and alive. A family circle that had somehow expanded to include this man who had arrived as a stranger and become… what exactly? After dinner, when the children had been tucked into bed with whispered goodnights, Sarah and Daniel sat before the hearth. The fire was modest, habit of economy still ingrained, but adequate to ward off the spring evening's chill. Blackwood's trial starts next week, Daniel said, breaking a comfortable silence. Marshal Townsend says they want me to testify. Sarah nodded. Will you go? Have to. Need to see this through. He studied the flames. I'd like to ask a favor, though. What is it? Let me send 2 of my men to stay here while I'm gone. Just as a precaution. Sarah tensed. Is there still danger? I thought Blackwood's operation was dismantled. It is. But men like that have friends. People who benefited from his schemes, who might lose out now that he's facing justice. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. Probably nothing will happen, but I'd rest easier knowing you weren't alone. She wanted to refuse, to assert her independence as she had for 3 years. But she thought of Joshua standing on the porch with an empty shotgun, of Emily's tears during the confrontation. Her pride wasn't worth their safety. All right, she agreed, but they sleep in the barn. Daniel smiled. Of course. Another silence fell between them, more charged than the last. Sarah became acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the firelight played across his features, softening the lines that hardship and responsibility had carved there. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could reconsider. Daniel went very still. Have you? She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. The partnership joining our lands. It makes practical sense. Yes, he said carefully. It does. But the other part, she paused, gathering her thoughts. I can't make promises yet, Daniel. It's too soon. I understand. But, she continued, finally looking up to meet his gaze, I'm not saying no. Just not yet. The hope that kindled in his eyes made her heart skip. I can live with not yet. Daniel stood, sensing perhaps that the moment had reached its natural conclusion. I should go. It's a long ride back, and I've got an early start tomorrow. Sarah walked him to the door, painfully aware of the silence in the small cabin, of the children sleeping just behind the thin partition wall, of all the words still unspoken between them. At the threshold, Daniel turned to her. May I call again when I return from Austin? I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Something in his expression shifted, a decision made. Slowly giving her every chance to step away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against her cheek, a touch so gentle it might have been a breeze passing between them. Good night, Sarah Coleman. She stood in the doorway long after he'd ridden away, her fingertips touching the spot where his lips had been, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions, fear and hope, loyalty and longing, past and possible future. Martha's question echoed in her mind. What was she more afraid of? Making a mistake by saying yes, or regretting saying no for the rest of her days? 3 days later, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find Daniel's promised men, 2 weathered cowboys named Pete and Hank, already at work replacing the worn planks of the front steps. Morning, ma'am, Pete called, tipping his hat. Hope we didn't wake you too early. Boss said to make sure everything was shipshape before he left for Austin. It's fine, she assured him, though dawn had barely broken. Can I offer you coffee? Already brewed some, ma'am, Hank said with a shy smile. Hope you don't mind us making free with your kitchen. Figured you deserved a bit of rest. Sarah blinked, unused to such consideration. Thank you, that was thoughtful. As the day progressed, she observed these men Daniel had sent, respectful, hardworking, and clearly loyal to their employer. They fixed the loose shutter that had rattled all winter, repaired the chicken coop door, and cleaned out the well without being asked. When Joshua followed them about, peppering them with questions, they answered patiently, even letting him help with the smaller tasks. Mr. Walker said to take good care of you folks, Pete explained when Sarah thanked them for their efforts. Said you were important to him. The simple statement lodged in her heart, warm and persistent. That evening, a writer arrived. Not Daniel, but a young man from town who worked for the telegraph office. Message for Mrs. Coleman, he announced, handing her a folded paper. Sarah opened it with trembling fingers, aware of the children watching curiously. Left for Austin today. Court summons arrived. Blackwood's men set fire to South Pasture before departure. Damage contained. Do not worry, property replaceable. You and children are not. Stay alert. Will return as soon as possible. Yours, Daniel. The word yours seemed to leap from the page, its implication both startling and oddly comforting. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Everything all right, Ma? Joshua asked, his young face serious. Sarah smiled reassuringly. Yes, Mr. Walker has gone to Austin for the trial. He just wanted us to know. That night, Sarah dreamed of fire, not the contained warmth of a hearth, but wild, consuming flames racing across open pasture, devouring everything in their path. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The cabin was quiet except for the children's steady breathing. She rose, drawn to the window by an instinct she couldn't name. Outside, the night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Texas sky like diamonds on black velvet. No sign of danger, no approaching riders, nothing to justify the unease that had pulled her from sleep. Yet something had changed. Sarah felt it in the air, in the subtle shifting of possibilities that surrounded her. Like the first green shoots pushing through winter soil, something new was growing, fragile, tentative, but undeniably alive. Whether she was ready or not, the seeds of change had been planted. All that remained was to see what would bloom when the seasons turned. Chapter 5, Trial by Fire. April in Texas brought wildflowers and thunderstorms in equal measure. Sarah Coleman stood in her newly planted vegetable garden, satisfaction in her heart. The neat rows promised future harvests, no longer just subsistence planting, but abundance. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel left for Austin. His men, Pete and Hank, had settled into a comfortable routine, sleeping in the barn, but becoming almost part of the household. Joshua followed Pete everywhere, absorbing knowledge about horses and cattle. Emily had adopted Hank as a willing audience for her drawings. "Mail's here, Mrs. Coleman." Pete approached, waving an envelope. Sarah tucked Daniel's letter into her pocket. Some messages were best read in private. That evening, she opened it on the porch. "My dear Sarah, the trial proceeds slowly, but the evidence speaks for itself. The governor himself attended yesterday's session. I gave my testimony 3 days ago, speaking not just of the ambush, but of what came after. The kindness of a family who had nothing to spare, yet gave everything. News reached me of another fire, this one at the Jenkins place. Martha is unharmed, but her barn is lost. I've sent additional men to strengthen the watch around your property. Acts of retribution meant for me are affecting others, and I feel responsible. I should return within the week. Until then, know that you are in my thoughts as constant as the North Star. Yours, Daniel." Martha's barn, the news sent a chill through her. Blackwood's reach extending even from a courthouse cell. "Everything all right?" Pete asked during his evening rounds. "Martha Jenkins lost her barn to fire," Sarah replied. "Daniel sent more men." Pete's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackwood's got friends still carrying out his dirty work. Don't worry, Mrs. Coleman. Hank and I won't let anything happen to you and the young'uns." Sarah checked on her sleeping children, whispering a prayer for their protection. Later, sleep eluded her. When had Daniel become so essential to her thoughts? She was still pondering this when the first gunshot split the night. Sarah rushed her children to the storm cellar, pressing her pistol into Joshua's hands. "Stay quiet as mice." Outside, riders circled the cabin. Pete staggered in, blood streaming from his forehead. 4 riders, Blackwood's men. Hank's hit. Then came the splash of liquid against wood, followed by the unmistakable smell of kerosene. "They're going to burn us out," Sarah whispered. Flames erupted along the front porch. Pete drew the attacker's fire while Sarah tried desperately to fight the blaze, but it was futile. They barely managed to rescue the children from the cellar before the cabin collapsed in flames. They hid in a stand of trees, Emily sobbing, Joshua rigid with shock, when riders approached from the direction of town. For a moment, Sarah's heart seized with fresh terror. Then she recognized the lead rider. "Daniel," she whispered. He dismounted in a flash, scanning the burning homestead. "Sarah," he shouted, voice raw with fear. "Here," she called, stumbling from the trees. Daniel caught her in an embrace so fierce it nearly lifted her from the ground. "When we saw the fire from the ridge, I thought I'd lost you." "The children are safe," he assured her, looking to where Joshua and Emily emerged with Pete. "Thank God." Sarah finally found her voice. "The cabin, everything, it's all gone." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "Buildings can be rebuilt. You and the children are what matter." Emily flung herself against Daniel's legs. "You came back," she sobbed. "You promised you'd come back." "Of course I did, sweet pea. I'll always come back for you." Joshua approached slowly, still holding the pistol. Daniel took it gently. "You protected your mother and sister. You did well, son." The word son hung in the air, weighted with meaning beyond this moment of crisis. "What now?" Sarah asked, looking at the smoldering ruins of her home. Daniel's face hardened. "Now we go home, to the Triple W. But..." "Not a request, Sarah. These men came for me, but they hurt you instead. I won't give them another chance." Too exhausted to protest, Sarah nodded. Home. The word should have conjured images of the cabin she'd shared with Thomas. Instead, it brought to mind Daniel's steady presence, the safety he represented, the future he offered. Within the hour, they were mounted and riding toward the Triple W. Behind them, the remains of the Coleman homestead glowed like dying embers against the night sky. Sarah didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. Dawn was breaking as they crested the final hill, and the Triple W came into view. Sarah had heard of Daniel's ranch, but had never seen it. The main house was 2 stories of solid craftsmanship, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Outbuildings spread in a neat arrangement. Bunkhouse, barn, storehouses, corrals. Unlike her humble homestead, this was an operation built for generations, for legacy. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, her small voice heavy with sleep and wonder. Daniel's arms tightened around Sarah's waist as he guided the horse down the slope. It's just a place, he said quietly, for her ears alone. Without the right people in it, it's just wood and nails. As they approached, the door of the main house flew open. A woman hurried out, gray-haired, plump, with the efficient movements of someone used to managing a household. "Oh, thank the Lord," she called, hurrying down the steps. "When you rode out like the devil himself was after you, I feared the worst." "Mrs. Gunderson," Daniel greeted her. "We have wounded, and guests who need care." The housekeeper took in the scene with a quick, assessing gaze. The soot-stained faces, Hank's makeshift stretcher, the exhaustion evident in every line of their bodies. "Bring him to the bunkhouse," she ordered the men carrying Hank. "I'll send for the doctor." She turned to Sarah and the children. "You poor dears, come inside. Hot baths and food, that's what you need." The next hours passed in a blur for Sarah. Mrs. Gunderson's capable hands organized baths, found clean clothes, prepared a hearty meal that Sarah could barely remember eating. The children, resilient as only the young can be, revived somewhat with food and warmth, though Emily refused to leave Sarah's side even for a moment. It was mid-morning when Daniel found Sarah sitting by the window in the guest bedroom, where Mrs. Gunderson had installed her and Emily. The little girl was finally asleep, curled in the middle of a bed larger than any she'd ever known. "How is she?" Daniel asked softly, closing the door behind him. "Exhausted, frightened." Sarah touched her daughter's tangled hair. "But children adapt. She'll be all right." "And you?" Sarah looked up at him, seeing the concern etched into his features, the guilt he couldn't quite conceal. "I've lost homes before. When Thomas died, I learned that walls and roofs don't matter as much as what's inside them." Daniel sank into the chair opposite her, the weariness of the night finally showing in the slump of his shoulders. "This is my fault. If I hadn't brought Blackwood's vengeance to your door—" "Stop!" Sarah reached across to touch his hand. "You didn't set that fire. You didn't shoot Hank. The blame lies with the men who did, and with Blackwood, who ordered it. Even so, nothing." Her fingers tightened on his. "You saved us, Daniel. You came when we needed you most." He turned his hand to clasp hers, his grip almost painfully tight. "I shouldn't have left. The trial be damned. I should have stayed. And let Blackwood go free? Let him keep hurting others?" Sarah shook her head. "No. You did what needed doing, just as I did." A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of all they'd experienced together in the short months since Daniel Walker had collapsed on her porch, bleeding and unconscious. "I received word just before I left Austin," Daniel said finally. "The jury found Blackwood guilty on all counts. He'll hang within the month." "Good." The vehemence in Sarah's voice surprised even her. "The men who attacked last night, they were the last of his loyal followers. A desperate attempt to silence me before the verdict." Daniel's jaw tightened. "They failed." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly. "They failed." They sat in companionable silence for a while, their hands still linked, both watching Emily's peaceful breathing. Outside, the sounds of ranch life continued, men calling to each other, horses neighing, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Life continuing, despite the night's violence. "You'll stay here," Daniel said finally. Not a question, but a statement. "You and the children, not just until we rebuild your cabin, though we will, if that's what you want, but permanently." Sarah met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. "Are you asking me something, Daniel Walker?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I thought I already had. Back in February, standing in the snow. A lot has happened since then." "Yes." He looked down at their joined hands. "Some men might say it's too soon. That grief and gratitude can cloud judgment, make people rush decisions they might later regret. And what do you say?" His eyes lifted to hers, clear and certain. "I say life on the frontier teaches you to recognize what matters when you find it. I say I've seen you at your lowest and your strongest, and I admire both equally. I say I love your children as if they were my own." He paused. "And I say I love you, Sarah Coleman. Not out of gratitude or pity or convenience, but because you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Sarah felt tears welling, the first she'd allowed herself since the attack. "I lost a home last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But sitting here, I realize I may have found another one. Not these walls, not this ranch, but here." She squeezed his hand. "With you." Daniel's breath caught. "Is that a yes?" She nodded, a tear finally escaping to trace a path down her cheek. "It's a yes." He leaned forward, one hand rising to cup her face. thumb gently brushing away the tear. "May I kiss you? Properly this time?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty, a promise, a beginning, a homecoming. When they parted, both were breathing faster, the connection between them palpable as a living thing. "We'll rebuild," Daniel promised. "Not just your cabin, though we can if you want a place of your own, but something new, together." Sarah glanced at Emily, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the momentous conversation happening beside her. "The children already love you," Sarah finished. "Joshua follows you like a shadow. Emily draws pictures of you daily. They've chosen already, even if they don't realize it." Daniel's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then we'll make it official, as soon as you're ready." Sarah thought of Thomas, his laugh, his dreams, the life they'd built together. She would always carry him in her heart, but she thought too of the future stretching before her now. No longer a bleak struggle for survival, but a path filled with possibility. "I'm ready," she said simply. "We all are." Outside, the Texas spring continued its relentless renewal. Bluebonnets swayed in the breeze, cattle grazed on fresh grass, and on the highest hill of the Triple W Ranch, hope bloomed as tenacious and beautiful as wildflowers after winter's retreat. Chapter 6, New Beginnings. The June wedding was simple yet meaningful, held under the sprawling oak tree that marked the boundary between what had once been the Coleman homestead and the Triple W Ranch, united now, like the couple who stood beneath its branches. Sarah wore a cornflower blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Martha Jenkins had helped sew it. Daniel stood tall in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Sarah as she walked toward him on Joshua's arm. The boy had insisted on giving his mother away. Emily walked ahead, scattering wildflower petals, her face alight with joy. "Do you, Daniel William Walker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" asked the minister brought in from Fort Worth. Daniel's voice was steady. "I do." "And do you, Sarah Elizabeth Coleman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah looked into Daniel's eyes, seeing all they had endured together. "I do." As twilight deepened, Daniel led Sarah away from the celebration toward the rise where her homestead had once stood. There, a young oak sapling had been planted in fresh-turned earth. "What's this?" she asked, touching a delicate leaf. "A beginning," Daniel said, his arms encircling her waist. "I thought about rebuilding the cabin exactly as it was, but I realized we're not replacing what was lost. We're creating something new. The tree? Oaks live for centuries. Long after we're gone, it will still be here, watching over whatever we build together." Emotion tightened Sarah's throat as she understood. Not erasing her past, but honoring it. Not forgetting Thomas, but acknowledging that new love could grow alongside cherished memories. "I love you," she said simply. Daniel's arms tightened. "And I love you, always will." 3 years later, Sarah sat on the porch of the Triple W Ranch house, rocking a cradle with her foot. Inside, 2-month-old Thomas Daniel Walker slept soundly. Daniel returned from the pasture with Joshua, now 13 and growing tall. Emily, 10, emerged from the house with a book in her hands, asking to read to the baby. Sarah watched them, marveling at the changes. Joshua was no longer the solemn, burdened child of years past, but a confident young man. Daniel had softened, laughing more easily, finding joy in simple moments. They had built something here, a blended family forged in hardship and sealed with love, a community that extended beyond themselves to the entire ranch. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, kissing the top of her head. "Just counting blessing," Sarah replied. That evening, they stood together at the bedroom window, watching the stars scattered across the velvet sky. "Happy?" Daniel asked softly. Sarah covered his hands with her own, her wedding ring catching the moonlight. "More than I ever thought possible." A shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, like the wounded stranger who had arrived at her door that winter night, appearing unexpectedly, blazing with momentary glory, and changing everything in its wake. Some might call it coincidence, others, destiny. Sarah Coleman Walker simply called it grace, the mysterious gift that transforms the broken into the beautiful, that brings light to the darkest night, that offers second chances when all hope seems lost. And in the heart of the Texas frontier, she had found her own miracle. A family built from ashes, a love born of courage, and a future as vast and promising as the land itself. The end Mrs. Gunderson retreated to her kitchen domain, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone with the baby on the porch. Daniel sat beside her, one finger tracing the soft curve of the infant's cheek. "He has your eyes," he observed, not for the first time. And your chin, Sarah countered, smiling at the familiar exchange. Poor child. Lucky child, Daniel corrected, his arms sliding around her shoulders. To have you for a mother, to grow up here, with all this. He gestured toward the expanse of the Triple W, the land that stretched green and golden to the horizon. Sarah leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder. Did you ever imagine that night when you were running from Blackwood's men that it would end like this? No, he admitted. I was just trying to stay alive, trying to do what was right, no matter the cost. His arm tightened around her. But fate had other plans, better ones than I could have dreamed. The baby whimpered softly, rooting against Sarah's shoulder. She shifted him, preparing to feed him as the light began to fade from the sky, painting the land in shades of rose and gold. Do you ever regret it? Daniel asked quietly. Opening your door that night? Taking in a stranger who brought danger to your doorstep? Sarah looked at him, at the man who had become her husband, her partner, the father her children deserved. She thought of the path that had led them here, of pain and loss, yes, but also of courage and hope, of second chances and new beginnings. Never, she said simply, not for a single moment. Daniel kissed her then, a gentle affirmation of all they had built together. Behind them, the Triple W ranch house glowed with lamplight, a beacon of home and safety in the vastness of the Texas landscape. Around them stretched the land they had united, that would pass to their children and their children's children. And before them lay a future still unfolding, rich with possibility. They had both known darkness, the kind that tests the soul and strips away pretense. They had faced enemies, weathered storms, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger for having found each other in the midst of life's harshest season. That night, long after the children were asleep, Sarah stood at the bedroom window, gazing out at the stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Daniel's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Happy? He asked softly. Sarah covered his hands with her own, her wedding ring catching the moonlight. More than I ever thought possible. Together they watched as a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, a fleeting moment of beauty in a universe of infinite wonder. Like the wounded stranger who had arrived at her door that winter night, it had appeared unexpectedly, blazed with momentary glory, and changed everything in its wake. Some might call it coincidence, others destiny. Sarah Coleman Walker simply called it grace, the mysterious gift that transforms the broken into the beautiful, that brings light to the darkest night, that offers second chances when all hope seems lost. And in the heart of the Texas frontier, where danger and beauty existed side by side, where life could change in the space between heartbeats, she had found her own miracle, a family built from ashes, a love born of courage, and a future as vast and promising as the land itself. Wow, what a story! And there is more coming. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss the new stories.